Welcome to the Passionately Wrong podcast, everyone. We're glad you're here. I'm James, and I'm here together with my co-host, Randy. And today we have another ASH guest, Bill Clayton. Bill, thanks for joining us. We're delighted to have you on. You are early on in the series where we interview people who went to the American School of the Hague. And we're still feeling our way a little bit about the best way to get into people's so interesting history and background. One way that we like to do this is simply to ask, when were you in The Hague? What were you doing there, or presumably your family? Maybe just give us a little bit the timeline of your period at the American School of The Hague.
Sure. So thanks for inviting me on. I'm a little nervous. It's my first podcast ever, so I don't mind admitting that. So I actually lived in The Hague twice. My father worked for Mobil. He worked for the chemical division. And born in New Jersey, quickly moved to London in 1970 and spent a couple years there. Got a British accent, which I immediately lost when I came back to the States and went to first grade. Stayed in New Jersey for a few more years, went to ASH back in, I guess, 1977 and entered fifth grade there. Stayed fifth through really the beginning of ninth, even though I didn't go to ninth grade at ASH. The school had started before I left. Moved to Houston and did ninth, 10th, 11th grade there. And then came back for my senior year of high school, which was a fantastic experience. So class of 85.
I got a lot of crossover because I was born in Houston and I was born in Memorial Hospital, and my parents lived near Katy, not just east of Katy, on the edges of Houston at the time. So we have a lot of crossover there too. Plus I lived in London. I graduated high school in London. I was in London when I was in fifth grade too, when we got evacuated out of Iran. So they definitely have a lot of crossover. That's crazy.
You got evacuated. That's amazing.
During 78 when the Shah left and Khomeini was coming in. So it was before the embassy. The embassy got taken down in November of 79. But there was a lot of problems, and the embassy got taken over once or twice before that. And then the students just gave it back and said, did that. And then I don't know if you remember, Ross Perot had his executives taken hostage. That happened in February of 89, I think. We got evacuated. I think the hostages were taken in December, and we got evacuated in November. Like Ross Perot was like, everyone go. So
scary.
When you're 9, not so much. You're just like, what's going on?
I think it's partly an attribute of kids, but I suspect, and this is something I realized talking to Ashers, that probably most Ashers did, which was you learn how to be a little bit of a social chameleon. You joke about having developed a good British accent, Bill, but I have no doubt that you did, and I bet you did too, Randy. And I think it's because part of the way that we are successful in a new place is just observing what's going on and a little bit figuring out how to thrive in that system. I know from our previous discussions, Randy, that you're a wizard at figuring out how systems in the military worked and just making your way. And that's something maybe we'll come back to in terms of what we picked up from our time in ASH and how it helped us in other places. But already, Bill, hearing you talk about your early childhood years and even just joking about developing a British accent makes me think that I suppose if you had to have your years broken up, it's good to graduate your final year from ASH. Somehow senior year is fun, a lot going on. After you graduated, 1985, where did your path lead you? Back to the U.S.? And if so, what did that feel like?
I don't remember any feeling of kind of accommodation or getting used to being back in the States whatsoever. I came back to go to college. I went to school in upstate New York, Rensselaer, and got my undergrad, master's, and PhD in physics there. And then went to South Carolina. I've been in South Carolina since 92 with a 4-year stint in France, in Clermont-Ferrand. People here 20 years.
We just talked to another one of our class A6 yesterday. And so you were in Houston. Drinking age was 18. Probably didn't matter to high school students. But then you go back to Holland. You can drink free. I mean, you can drink legally. And then when you go back, you can still drink at 18 for a year. And then the drinking age changed when you're in your sophomore year, probably, because when I was in my freshman year, we could drink for 2 months or something like that. And then the age changed on the top of us. But for us, it was, especially since we spent 4 or 5 years in Europe before we went back, the drinking thing was a big, like, all of a sudden I'm a criminal and from being legal and stuff. And then it was just kind of a silly transition, like in the middle of the school year. They're like, nope, no more drinking in college.
So I was a year ahead of you. And I was in New York, and it sounds like they did things a little differently, because when I got there, I want to say the drinking age was, drinking age was 18, but no, the drinking age was 19, but I was 18. That didn't matter. And then when I turned 19, it went to 21, and it kind of mattered. That whole transition period was a transition. It went from a free-for-all to whatever it is now. I know my daughter had 2 fake IDs at one point, so.
They still do that?
There's a whole bunch of things I was hoping to touch on from the ASH experience, and I don't even really know where to start. But one of the things that stands out in my mind and my memories is the class projects that they did in middle school. So every year, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, 6th, 7th, 8th for me, the entire class went away for a week. And in 5th grade, we went to a youth hostel in the south of France. 7th grade was, I said south of France, south of Holland. 7th grade was in Normandy. The whole class went to a town called Saint-Malo. And then 8th grade, we all went to England for a week.
I remember that.
My memory is we had a dedicated class to this, for the whole first semester before Project England. We studied medieval culture. We learned what they ate, what they drank, what their music was. We studied Shakespeare in detail. And then we went to Stratford upon Avon and saw Shakespeare in the Globe. And we studied France. We studied the Battle of Hastings, and we studied the Bayeux Tapestry. And then we all went and saw the Bayeux Tapestry. And we went to Mont Saint-Michel. We went to the Isle of Jersey, and the memories that formed. And I think more the way they combined like in-school learning with experiential learning and taking us to the places that we studied, that stayed with me my whole life. And I think we were very privileged to go to a school that has that level of teacher engagement, but also just commitment to learning. And that's probably what sets ASH apart the most in my mind from the other schools I went to. And between us, we got a pretty good sampling of different education approaches. But the ASH people, I found them to be super engaged. And that wound up being really important to me. So 5th through 8th grade in the Netherlands, I'm a little kid, everything's fine, everything's happy. But in 9th grade, when we went to Houston, my parents got divorced basically immediately upon landing in the States. And that was super tough on me. And I fell in with a bad crowd, and my grades suffered. And actually, this is a good story. 11th grade, I actually found my 11th grade report card from Kingwood High School, Houston. And I had 2 Fs, a D, and a bunch of Cs my last semester.
Wow.
I got to ASH, and they're like, Bill, it's so great to have you back. You were an awesome student. We're going to put you in AP Calc, AP Physics, AP English, AP this, AP that. Right down. You're doing MU, you're doing Model United Nations. You're doing all this. I said, okay, great. We contacted your school in Texas, but they haven't sent us your transcript yet. I said, okay. And I get into the ball starts rolling. I get a few months into it. I've got these bad habits from Kingwood. I'm not doing my homework. I'm not studying. The teachers nailed my butt to the wall. But the word's not aggressive. The word is maybe something like proactive. It's like they would not let me fail. And they did it with caring and compassion. And within a matter of, I don't know, a month or something, I was doing great. I was back on track. I was acing all my tests. I was getting A's in my courses. And about halfway through the semester, they called me down to the principal's office and they said, hey, we still don't have your transcripts. The school's really giving us a hard time. They're being a pain and unreasonable. But your teachers say you're doing great. You're one of their best students. So keep on keeping on. So I have a great semester. And right before Christmas time, they call me back to the principal. And this time my mom's there. And the principal, I think it was Mr. Hurd. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mr. Hurd's like, and Andy Nicastro is in.
Yeah. Hey.
I'm like, okay, what's going on? And my physics teacher, Bennett, maybe? Anyway, all my teachers and my parents are in there. I'm like, oh boy. They're like, yeah, we got your grades, Bill. There's obviously something wrong with that school. And you're doing really well. So what we've done is we're going to change these and keep in these AP classes. And that is how I got into college.
Wow.
I
That's great.
I don't even have the words for that.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
They basically changed my entire life.
And I've noticed that with my kids too, going to school in the US system, growing up, coming back and going, hey, because I was estranged from my kids for most of their life. But when I wasn't, they'd come home and say, hey, I took this test today, multiple choice, and they said there's 52 states. And they said, I got it wrong. I put 50. Isn't there 50 states, Dad? I was like, yes. So I go to the office next day. Who's teaching these courses? And then same thing with some schools. It depends on the state. It depends on the school district, but they're not sticking around after school or during lunch or whatever to help people that need problems and things. They're just like, yep, that's it. I'm out of here or something like that. There's no more investment in the student after that, unless it's like at the football field or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it really affected the whole trajectory of my life because maybe I would have gone to community college or something, but I went on, get a degree in physics. I was a good student. I just had fallen on a bad year, and they recognized that and gave me a chance. And it made all the difference.
I owe everything to James and some of my other friends because I don't think I ever would have taken an AP class, except that all my friends were in AP classes. So if I wanted to spend time with them, I had to like up it. And I was horrible at pretty much everything. I got B's in all my AP classes, which looked like A's and more. But I suffered in those classes a lot, especially history. I remember falling asleep a lot.
They gave me enough AP credit to graduate in 3 years with a double major. I brought 5 AP classes in the college. And since I was paying for it myself, I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I brought 5 AP classes too. What about you, James? You probably brought 10, didn't you?
Yeah, no, I had 4. I got the first semester of college out of the way from that. But I think what you guys are describing, Bill, that's a good story. And it really shows you how powerful a little bit of compassion along the way could be. But I think there's 2 sides to that about ASH that are so special. For sure, the teachers themselves, and I guess 3 aspects, the things that they would undertake, like those school trips to other places for a week. That's a really big enterprise if you look at how that contrasts with the types of school trips people can manage today. If you can get 30 kids on a bus and take them to a local zoo or museum, that's a big deal. But anyway, the attention and care from the teachers is extraordinary. And I wonder, Randy, if there's something to be said for, did the fact that we knew kids came and went with their parents, right? You're there for a year, you're gone because your dad or mom gets assigned somewhere else, then you're back for a couple of years. There was an element of, you can't take your friendships for granted or the people who are there for granted. I don't know, it somehow seemed more intense because you had to take people for when you had them and you couldn't be sure that they were going to be there in the following year. So something about that experience was quite vivid.
I got 3 different points from Bill's story here. So 1, the first time I ever used a compass was in England on the England trip when we were going cross country by ourselves. Like we could have got gored by a cow for all I know. It was crazy. I don't know, say let's still do that or not, but it's crazy. We're going cross country with 2 other guys who had no idea how to read a map, going from place to place. And I ended up joining the army and learning how actually compasses work and everything. That was pretty interesting. The second thing is I was in Amsterdam for the first 2 years I was in Holland. I lived in a small town called Eemnes near Naarden. And so it was easier to go to Amsterdam. So I went to ISA, and our school trip in 6th grade was to Greece. So we went to Greece for 2 weeks, and my mom, they asked for parents to volunteer, and they would pay for them to be like the sponsors to corral the kids. And so my mom was a sponsor for that. So that was awesome. We studied Greece all year, just like you said. And then we go there, we see the Parthenon and the Olympic Stadium and all that stuff. That was awesome. And then, there was a next step. It was a private school. I think we have to go there, right? It was a private school. The teachers were probably paid very well. And it was probably in their best interest to make everyone happy as well. But they were just really caring people, and they really cared that our grades were good. And it was an amazing experience in London and in Holland. And then back to the accent thing, which we started with why I didn't get a British accent. I went to an American school. I had a few British people there, but we were more overwhelmed by American accents than anything. And he went to a British primary school, so that's where he got his accent.
Yeah, I was in whatever the equivalent of preschool would be in London. I remember Mrs. Holzer and Corporal Punishment.
Wow.
You will speak with a British accent, or that.
I got a few words wrong in the spelling bee, color, things like that. There, my hand slapped.
I work as an editor now, Bill, and I'm in Europe, so I get a lot of British, Australians sometimes. And when I'm going through there, I have to restrain myself not to do copy editing as I go through. And sometimes I have to go, is that a misspelled word? I don't even know if they spell something like that differently than we do. But yeah, I noticed that more than I did ever before.
You triggered a train of thought, which is a little bit of a tangent, but I think I'll launch it. It occurred to me that this experience, and maybe it really starts with having expatriate parents, but living abroad, going to school abroad, made me realize that I really enjoyed travel. I really enjoyed other cultures, and that I had a relative advantage with respect to my fellow Americans, and that I'd been exposed to 3 different cultures by the time I was, 10, heck, and lived in them 7, 8, 9 years overseas. So I said, when I decided I wasn't going to go into academia, which is a whole nother story involving the fall of communism, but when I had made that decision, I said, I'm gonna look for an international company, and I'm going to try and get an expatriate assignment, because I know how to work in an environment of Europeans and Asians and people with different cultures. And heck, I speak a little bit of Dutch. Now I speak French. I didn't speak good French at the time. But so I hooked up with Michelin Tires, which is a French company. And just another way, being at Ash and living abroad, aimed the arrow of my life and kept me in an international trajectory. So yeah,
James and I, same thing. I'll let James talk on his behalf. But when I was thinking about joining the military, I was like, I don't like college. I did it for a year. I want to travel. I want adventure. I want to scuba dive. I want to skydive. The military will pay me to teach me all that stuff, and they'll move me around the world. That sounds like a great deal. And that's the mentality I went into the military. And then I know James, I'm not sure what motivated him to go overseas, but a love of being overseas probably.
That was definitely part of it. And it's like you guys said, the experience already of being at the American School of The Hague, and then the international exposure you get there. It's not just being in The Hague. Our classmates were from all over as well. So you really were exposed to lots of different backgrounds, lots of different cultures. I was out of the U.S. for 10 years when I went back to the U.S. for college, and I really felt some culture shock. Even though I was going to a university with international students, it really felt, oh man, at least the Americans there looked at the world very differently, very insular, and it felt a little stifling to me. I got past that, but after mostly my education, college, then law school, then business school. Bill and I overlapped at RPI, by the way. I was there getting my MBA when he would have been finishing up his physics PhD, I guess. By that time, I was there 90 to 93. But anyway, it started to feel a little bit, adventure was calling. And I was like, oh man, is there a way to get overseas again? And I was able to work that out with my first law firm. And actually, I switched law firms to go to work in Frankfurt. But I don't think that would have made any sense at all. That wouldn't have been something that would have occurred to me if I hadn't already spent time overseas. So for sure, I think going to Ash and having expatriate parents, like you said, Bill, exposed us as kids to the idea that, hey, there's a whole other world out there. and people lived in it. And it's interesting to spend time in it and visit it, whether it's just travel or whether you have the opportunity to work there. You probably didn't have in mind when you went to Michelin that you would work overseas, or was that already the germ of an idea in the back of your head because it was an international company?
Yeah, absolutely. I said, hey, French company based in France. I'll have the opportunity to be an expat. I've had, I don't know, 3 years of French training. So, plus I've been in France and had a chance to try and throw it around a little, and I could get around. I couldn't have a conversation really. But that turned out to be a huge advantage when I got to the company because 100% of everything was in French. You want to use a computer code? It's in French. The documentation's in French. Everything was. So that worked to my advantage. But yeah, I absolutely went into it saying I'd like to get back overseas.
I got a couple ideas. One is that the reason I think that I have closer ties to the people in Ash is that it was just so much easier. And I don't know why this didn't turn over the ASL ones, but it was so much easier to get together and hang out. Like I didn't have to drive when I was in 9th grade or whatever, 10th grade. I didn't have to drive. I could get on a train and I could meet James somewhere. I could get on a bus, meet James somewhere. We could go do something. And even after school, I didn't have to wait around for someone to pick me up and move me around. All the things we could do together on weekends or after school, go to Scheveningen and go to the arcade and the McDonald's by the beach and wherever. I don't even remember the names of everything, but
I know where
you guys know the McDonald's I was talking about. Yeah, the bowling alley and all that stuff. All that stuff, you could do that without having your parents get involved and getting out of work early or stuff like being soccer moms and things like that. And so that made it a lot easier to build these relationships. If I was going to go play Dungeons and Dragons somewhere or whatever, I could go and I didn't have to have my mom drop me off somewhere or something like that. I think those were big things. And then that you talk about the language. I think our language classes overseas, I only took Dutch for 1 year. I took it in Amsterdam, but I took Spanish for 2 years from a Spaniard, and I forget his name, but he was a very aggressive Spaniard. But I feel like that class was probably better than what they're getting in the United States. And because I live in a foreign country, I took it maybe a little bit more seriously. So when I came in the military and they're like, hey, speak any languages? Yeah, I took 2 years. She's like, what? So did I, but I don't speak a lick. I was like, well, that's weird because I do. And then when I took the Spanish test, I actually scored enough to get me pointed in, like, I ended up being a Green Beret, Bill, and I worked in South America because I took a language test and I already spoke a little Spanish and they could see that on their test. So they like, oh, we're going to put you in the South American division. And so as opposed to, I could have ended up in the African or European. I think they were looking for Russian and Polish speakers or Asia or the Middle East or something like that. They didn't ask me if I spoke Farsi, fortunately, but so, yeah, the language thing was a big thing. I feel like the people in the United States, when they take language classes, they feel like they're never going to learn the language based on the high school Spanish they got. But I don't think I ever felt that. I took 2 years of French, 3 years of Spanish, and a year Dutch, and a couple of years of Farsi when I was in Iran. So I had a smattering. And even when I went to Afghanistan as a soldier in 2003, Iranian Farsi is very similar to Dari, so much so that you can understand and similar words and things. And when I spoke to my interpreter for the first time in Farsi, he's like, you have an Iranian accent. That's like, thank you very much. Language, I think, is a big thing, a big deal that we all experienced over there. More appreciation that it's possible to learn another language. Where I think a lot of American students, when they grow up, they're like, yeah, I'll never learn a language. I tried it for 3 years and I never learned anything and I never got anything out of it.
Yeah, I was taught to swim in the middle of the ocean there. Before I went to France, I bet I had more language training than any expat in the history of the universe because I took Michelin's intermediate French, advanced French, and then I had another advanced class. And then I had 9 months of one-on-one French tutoring. And it was an hour a day or something like that. It might have been 2 hours. But when I went over there, I was like, man, I am so well prepared. And the first day I'm at a meeting and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. There are 20 people in the room. And I realized, oh crap, they're going around the room. Everyone's expressing their opinion on something. And it's coming to me. And I figured it out, and I was able to spit out a sentence or two. That was very humbling.
I was saying when
No
they
one's
threw me
ever
in,
told me I have a French accent. That's for
No.
sure.
me either.
I
I've never
I
wanted to
get
clear
rid of my accent in French.
Me either. My girl wife doesn't even speak very Spanish hardly at all. And when we go to Spain, we're moving to Spain in a couple months. But we went down there to look for some houses and stuff. And when I'm talking in Spanish, she's like, "You're so American." I was like, "You don't even speak Spanish." She's like, "Yes, but I can." You have an American accent no matter what language you speak.
Yeah.
And then the army threw me into the middle of the ocean too in Colombia. They're like, "Here, teach classes on weapons and how to save people's lives in Spanish. Ready, go." And of course, I'd been training for this. I get there, and it's so fast because I'm talking to these guys, and this guy's like, "Hey, any question?" This guy stands up like, "Sargento, blah, 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 blah." I was like, hey, despacio. Habla un poco más despacio, por favor. Sí, mi sargento, blah, 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 blah. I was like, hey. I said, talk some more slowly, or I can't understand you. Just like one word at a time. And then he did it again. I don't know what possessed me, but I just was like, whap. I slapped him. And everyone was like, ugh. I was like, talk slower. He's like, "Sí, mi sargento."
I didn't know slapping was an option, but that would have been useful.
It's a Spanish thing.
I wonder how important the Facebook group was towards building this sense of ASH cohesion. I guess you guys are both on the ASH Facebook groups. There's a couple different alumni groups. I wasn't on Facebook for a long time, and I only came back on by virtue of the invitation from Andrew in connection with the reunion. And he was trying to track down all of our classmates. And that is an active group. And I think he's by now managed to find almost everybody in our class of 86. But I know there's a bigger ASH group for everybody who went there. And there seems to be, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. Are people on there because they have such fond memories of ASH, or does joining it help you remember stuff that you wouldn't have otherwise remember? But I know for me, that group was useful in putting me back in touch with people that I maybe hadn't been in touch with. I found you, Bill, by virtue of a post you had made finishing your marathon in the local stadium here. I'm like, "Hey, that looks like Greenville. Are you in Greenville?" And you're like, "Yeah." I don't know. Did you spend much time there? Did you meet other classmates by virtue of that group? Or is that just a nice thing to have now after all these years?
No, absolutely. I could probably list the classmates that just popped up on the feed. And I'm like, "Oh, there's Tammy Homan. There's Nicole Groff. Invite friends," and then have some chats and catch up a little. And then Facebook helps me just keep on top of where they are in their lives. But yeah, it was really instrumental. When that group first started, I spent several months just diving into where is everyone now, catching up with people. And I've got classmates in New Zealand and just all over the world. So it was fascinating.
That's the only for the longest time, that's the only reason I kept my Facebook, because I never chatted, I never posted in it. I just wanted to see what was going on there. And I wanted to be available if anyone knew me to reach out to me. And actually, when you go to basic training, you have a battle buddy, and for the first 10 weeks, you and him are like, if you're not within arm's length, you're wrong and you're being punished. And so you're right next to each other, and you know everything about each other for the most part. And mine was Ralph Styrone, and we're all put in line alphabetically. That's why Styrone Searles. That's the only reason we were battle buddies. And this is way before Facebook or anything. This is in the 80s, late 80s. 87 is when I came in. And he went his own way after 10 weeks, or we spent 4 months together, actually, because we went to infantry training together. After 4 months, he went his one way and I went another. And there's no way to keep in touch. We didn't even know where we were going, so we couldn't even give each other's address. And he reached out to me 25 years later. And he's, "Hey, man, what's going on? I'm in Virginia." And so we've talked a couple of times. We haven't met. I really want to meet up with him pretty soon. And then also I've never had anybody from everybody that I was really good friends with, like James and Tom, Robert, all those guys. I kept in contact with those guys over the years, just with the rotating telephone numbers. I had this black book with crossed out numbers because people would move and you didn't have cell phones back then. So when you moved, you had to change your whole number. And most of the time I had their parents' number. So I could always, if I hadn't talked to them in 2 years because I was deployed so much, then the number was disconnected and I'd call their parents or something like that. But Facebook really helped me solidify a lot of those relationships. So I could find out where they were and I could change my travel plans and detour an hour and see someone in, Cary that lived near Raleigh or something like that. That was really cool. Facebook was really instrumental in that. I appreciated it.
Yeah, you made me realize Facebook alerted me to the fact that there are some Ashers living near my mom in Boca Raton in South Florida. So Robert Arzianetti and
Yeah.
Fred Sorensen and I would get together almost every time I went down there.
I'm
Go to
staying
the
at Robert's
art-
house. Yeah, I'm staying at Robert's house and like next week when I'm in Miami.
Please give him my greeting. He's a super interesting guy. They both are. But I really enjoyed that. And it is amazing how it takes 2 seconds to be comfortable with people you haven't seen in 35 years. I guess there's that shared experience.
But you got to get used to the dad jokes from Robert.
He's an interesting guy. I really liked getting to know him. Two other Ash things I kind of wanted to work in. One is you had mentioned how great it was to be able to get around to town without relying on your parents. For me, that was my bike. And starting in 6th grade, I biked 5 miles to school each way every day against the wind, right? In the rain, whatever, the snow. And that's stayed with me. I still bike. In fact, I'm planning a bike trip, hopefully with James for September. And the other exceptional thing I realized is, okay, how does your high school help you with your college application? Oh, we have these counselors and they'll give you career advice. Well, Ash hosts the Model United Nations. You need something for your college application? How about the representative from Venezuela? And I don't know what percentage of Ashers participated in that. Was it 100%?
Huge.
If you weren't a representative of a country, you're a security guard. So
Or
you did something.
You did something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And geez, you want to talk about a privileged environment. That's a premier event in education. MUN. A lot of people are study all through high school to get to go to that. And
The other schools had to get invited, right?
Yeah.
Actually, you're right. Now that you mention it, that's so many things like the school trip, like Model UN, you just take for granted because, okay, that's what we do, but it's not normal.
It's not normal.
And then the bike. Yeah, I missed. I every time I went to Europe or any foreign country out when I was in the military, I'd be like learning the public transportation system, and my American counterparts were like, "What are you doing? Just take a taxi."
Right.
I was like, I don't know if I can trust the taxi drivers half the time. And that's true. In some of these countries, they warn you, you may get kidnapped. Be careful. But the bus drivers, there's 20 people on the bus already. So I just have to watch to make sure I don't get pickpocketed. But I'll get there eventually. And then I'll always be able to figure it out. And then when I moved to Italy too, like all my guys that worked on the base, they all drove. But gas is so expensive in Europe. And I was just like, I'm going to walk, take the bus, or, why? I was like, why not? What's the big deal?
I moved back to the U.S. after 20 some years abroad. We visited a bunch of states and a bunch of cities, and we really made our lives difficult, we realize in hindsight, because our criteria were, can we walk around this place? And is there good public transportation? So we're walking to the bus terminal in all these cities, and it's mostly not a very inviting place. We're like, oh, this city's terrible. But it was really just people don't walk. I remember a few places we were visiting, and one place we didn't even get a rental car. We said, we're just going to walk everywhere. And people looked at us like we had two heads. Like, what?
That's where I got most of my reading done. I literally took me an hour and a half to get to and from school on a bus, a train, and a bus, because I lived in Leiden. And basically, like even now, like I'm an editor, like I said, and people, science fiction, fantasy, I edit their books for them. They send me their manuscripts and I edit. And then I'll make comparisons, comp titles. I'm like, hey, this is similar to this, but if you remember when he did this is what he did with this character, blah, blah, blah. And my wife and my partner who I edit with, they're always like, how do you know all these books? I was like, I spent 5 years in Holland, basically spending 3 hours a day on the train. So after I finished my homework on going in an hour, I was just going through books like they're going out of style. And I must have read like 500 science fiction and fantasy books. So I'm well read in this genre. And so that's why people hire me. But that's where I got all my reading done. That's where I got all my schoolwork done too, pretty much all my homework. And if you did track and field or something after school, you weren't getting home till 10.
So, Bill, we're going to have a few more final quick answer Ash questions for you. But before we get to that, two things. One, any other Ash related points that you had noted in your prep that you would like to comment on? And then otherwise, we would turn to a few of the passionately wrong type aspects, critical thinking, decision making. But first, before we get to that, Ash points that you either prepared for or were triggered by virtue of what we discussed. You've been good about raising them.
Just that I'm very much aware of the outsized influence that schools had on my life, and I'm very grateful for it. But when you're immersed in it, you don't realize it's a privilege and it's unusual. It's only afterwards, when you get out into the real world and look back, that you realize, wow, did we have something exceptional going? So ask away, James.
All right. We were talking about it before we started, but the purpose of the Passionately Wrong podcast is to help us take a better look at how we think and how we make decisions, and ultimately to realize when we're being silly and learn how to make better decisions. And that does involve a bit of looking back and introspection. To start with, I'd ask, is there a decision or two that you can think of that had a really big impact on your life? Now, your parents moving to someplace, but something that you decided. And have you learned anything about decision-making as a result of looking back on those big decisions?
Oh, boy.
And if
5
you want to
minutes or
think about
less.
that, exactly, 2 minutes.
So
You
what
can
comes
also
to
be
mind, it may be boring, but it's, I guess, relevant. I had, when I first graduated from RPI and got a salary, I realized I don't know anything about money at all. I better read a few books. So I read a few books on investing. And the point I took away was that I should invest in mutual funds and not look at it, and just buy the same amount every month forward, whether the market goes up or down. And I made a decision to do that day one. And that enabled me to retire a certain number of years ago. So I don't know if that is the type of thing you're trying to get at.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one, Bill. And I thought you were going to say that you didn't know anything about investing. You informed yourself about the right approach, which you just described, and then didn't follow that approach, which is what most of us do, which is we say, I could do better than that. And you learn from mistakes, but it's nice to hear that it's also sometimes the case that you actually can learn by doing some research and targeted study and then following the advice that you learn. I like to think that it's possible for people to learn positively and negatively. So that is, you learn from your mistakes, but you can also learn by, doing exactly what you just said. So that's good.
One of the most valuable lessons I got from investing is that I am not a financial genius. I am not even close. And some of the advice in the books was, don't buy individual stocks, but if you're going to, buy what you know and do it with money you can afford to lose. And that second part turned out to be particularly important to me because I gained a lot of experience losing small amounts of money. And looking back at that, I realized if I had been successful by chance, I probably would have thought I was a genius and would not have continued with the prudent approach that paid off and actually let me retire. So I think my bad luck was my good fortune, in that I learned, hey, I don't possess any special skill. I didn't pick Microsoft when they were 2 years old or anything like that.
That is a bias that I think people have that is quite prevalent and which distorts decision-making, which is good things that happen to us are the result of our agency. We're smart, we're brilliant, we made a good decision, we did everything correct, which leads to gross and undeserved overconfidence. And then at the same time, bad things that happen to us are the result of someone else's fault. Oh, that was just bad luck, or the circumstances were bad. And so we don't often take the proper lesson from the things that go well and the things that don't go well. And as painful as it can be, sometimes for a person with the right mindset, small mistakes are really quite illustrative. Yeah, I like that. How about poor decisions, Bill, if you've made any. Maybe it relates to I don't even know if it was a decision. Also, I'll just leave it open. Anything that stands out as maybe a bad decision and something you've learned from it besides just the investing that you just talked about. If you're willing to disclose it here on air.
I don't want to air my dirty laundry, so I think I'll pass on that.
How about just this generic question then? If you're talking with a friend who's facing a big decision, how do you approach the process of giving them advice on making a good decision?
That's interesting that you asked that, because I've had somewhat of an epiphany on that lately. I've discovered I advise my friends to do it the way I would do, which is not always necessarily helpful or good advice for them. And I have a friend right now who is considering opening a consulting business. She wants to move to Michigan and buy a farm where she can host retreats. And I'm like, have you written a business plan for this? Have you calculated your break-even income? And I'm like, this is not who this person is. And it's not useful to push that line of argument with her. So maybe I've learned a bit of humility in giving advice that my way is not the only way. I'd like to think I have. I'm 55. It's not too late to learn new tricks, is it?
No,
We hope not. Boy, oh boy.
I changed my whole career in the last 3 years. I'm 55 too.
I find, to your point, Bill, I write short articles and publish them on this site, and there's tons and tons of people who are trying to make a living with a side hustle. So they're writing or consulting or some non-traditional, I don't want to go work for a company 9 to 5. And I see tons of people writing about, I did it this way. If you do what I did, you too can be successful. And that advice infuriates me because it really doesn't take into account people are different, circumstances are different, and all of the factors that go into making something successful. It's not just, I did it this way, and therefore, so recognizing that the way you would approach a problem might not be suitable for your friend, does that make you not want to give advice? Or does it make you, how do you use that to advance things a step?
I think about, put myself in this person's shoes, what would be helpful and what type of thing, what type of argument, what type of conversation might be helpful to her, as opposed to, let me say my piece that came into my head without relating it to you first.
You mean people don't all think the same way?
Yeah.
That's good. Randy, any passionately wrong related questions? Otherwise, I'd go to our quick round of Ash fun facts.
No, but there's something to be said about, you seem to be very, I'm not sure what the word is. You think like I do, Bill, especially about making a business plan and figuring out I started a small business while I was in the military. It was the predecessor to Takeout Taxi and Uber Eats and stuff before the internet and GPS and ordering online. And I did that, and I went to an SBP or a small business association thing, and they're like, "This is incredible. No one ever comes with this. This is amazing." So I got a lot of oomph from it, and so I made it happen, and it wasn't a success. It was probably too early to be a success, but I think there's some merit in doing it, because hypothetically, I could have gone to a bank with this thing and said, "Hey, this is my plan." And it was like, "Wow, this is a great plan. Here's some money," but I didn't want to borrow money at the time. So if you want to go out and do it yourself and not make a plan, I think that's the hard one. And I do this with my editing clients all the time, passionately wrong people who come to me without a plan for their book. They don't have a focus, and they just put everything they ever wanted to put in a book. And I get it. And I'm like, man, there's 5 books in here, and some of it you're not going to be happy, but half of this doesn't even belong in this book with the point that you gave me. And you got to make a plan. I'm not a plan. I'm a pantser. That's like, that's great. You can start as a pantser, but once you get it all on paper, you need to plan it, because no one's going to read a confusing mess. So I think, as far as if we're going passionately wrong, James, it's basically that I think people having a plan, a base plan, is a good idea. And I've seen a lot of people fail by not doing it. And I think the people that don't fail without a plan are the unicorns out there.
So sorry, pantser is a person who flies by the seat of their pants.
In the world of editing and writing, it's the person who writes by the seat of their pants, who doesn't go in with a plan. They go in with, I want to make a book about a ninja who talks to butterflies and he's going to do this. And so they have a lot of, in a way, they have a lot of unique situations they brought to the table, but they're not all connected. And there's not a goal and there's not a character arc. And they have a bunch of scenes that are cool, but all the interstitial fluid tissue the connecting tissue doesn't work correctly because they just didn't have a flow. And so that's what, Pantser is a guy who writes by the seat of his pants, and then they got a planner who actually makes a plan. And a lot of time the pantsers have to turn to planners to get a good book together.
I'm getting a little bit the sense from this discussion that it is not actually passion that differentiates people. You can have plenty of people who are enthusiastic about their activity. You need that. If you're not really committed to something, then you're going to fail for that reason as well. It's like just an idea or just a fancy that I had. But then just like with successful investing, there are some simple rules that if you learn them, you can follow them. That's a plan, right? It seems like that might be a common factor to success in other endeavors, whether it's writing a book or building a house or whatever it is, developing a business plan. It behooves you and it improves your decision-making if you take the time to not just follow your passion, but also understand a little bit the rules of the game or the ways that one is successful at this approach.
And there's always going to be the outliers, the unicorns who beat those odds by accident or by fate or by luck.
And those unicorns are the ones that annoy the crap out of me because they're the ones who write books saying, if you do what I did, you can be a multimillionaire too. It's maybe, but probably not. But you have met them, Randy, and you're helping write some of their stories, which is interesting. For listeners here trying to say, all right, you guys say passion's not enough. You got to have a plan. There are exceptions. All kinds of people are going to be giving you advice. How do you determine which is the right sort of advice to follow? If I'm sitting here saying, all right, I want to learn how to be a good investor. I want to learn how to write a book. I want to learn how to start a consulting business. Where do you go to get reliable advice? How do you figure out what reliable advice is? And I know that's an open-ended question and it's not a 2-second answer, but that's what we're trying to explore. But if you guys have thoughts on it, how do you determine good advice from bad? I'd be happy for your 2-second thoughts.
Something that jumps into my mind right away is, so when a unicorn writes a book, hey, do it my way, this is how I succeeded. They tend not to recognize the element of luck or the role that luck and fortune played in their success. And the problem with duplicating their effort is you'd also have to duplicate their good luck at the right moment. And so good advice to me is somewhat independent of the amount of luck that you have. Does that make sense?
Yes. It can't be first, buy the winning lottery ticket. Second,
yeah.
All right. And that goes back to the basic human tendency to take credit for good things that happen to us, including luck, and to push away the things that bad that we feel like weren't our responsibility.
And I mentor a lot of people that want to write like nonfiction books about their success or about their life story and how they got to where they are. And I feel like my job is to call them on stuff because I'm like, I ghost wrote a book, Bill, about investing in rental real estate. This guy's he has a company that does it, and he was writing a foundational book for his business. And we made a plan and we're going through it. And I didn't ask him the right questions. I didn't ask him who he's writing this for. I figured he was writing it for Joe, the guy that's working. And hey, if you buy your first property and rent it out, and then you buy another property, and when you get to 10 or 15 properties, you can quit your job. I thought he was writing for Joe. And then we get halfway through the book, and this is a fiction book about a fictional family that represents what I thought was average Joe, because that's what we started with. And it turns out his average Joe made $130,000 a year and had a partially paid off mortgage that he could get equity from and stuff. I was like, whoa, that's not average Joe. He's, what do you mean? These are the people I work with every day. It's like, yeah, but I have to say the people that work with you every day aren't average Joe because that's not average Joe. Average Joe makes $60,000 a year. They might own their house, but they probably don't have any equity in it. And I don't think they can pull cash out to buy a house to rent it. So we need to change your reader, whoever your reader is, we need to outline what that is. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and kind of start over. And then one of the turning points, I don't know if I told you this, James, in the middle of the book, and then they inherit a bunch of money from their aunt so they could go buy a house. It's like, whoa, I thought this was an average Joe book because Joe has aunts, like rich aunts. Every Joe has a rich aunt. I don't think that's true. So I think we need to if you want to make this accessible to average Joe, we need to even not average Joe, it's got to be something that they can do within the concepts of their normal life. Everyone can do it, or at least a large percentage of people your readers can do it. But yeah, I think that represents what you said, James.
Excellent.
If you have a way of telling good advice from bad, I think you quickly become one of the richest people in the world.
That's what we're working towards. And I suppose you need to have big goals in order to achieve big things. It is a tiny minority of people who cause change to happen. So it is actually the unicorns. It doesn't mean that you can easily emulate them, but it does happen. It does happen all the time. So I'm holding out hope that we have some ways to get closer to the holy grail of good decision making. All right. So Bill, some Ash questions, and we'll see how to expand the list with time.
We'll see if you're a real Asher. This is where it comes down.
Right? No, nothing like that. Do you like your frites with or without mayonnaise?
Pataccia flip, mayonnaise and pinda sauce.
Oh my God. So that was the second question.
Only way to go.
On peanut butter sauce. Wow. All right. You're going to be an outlier there, but
I want some today.
So you talked about how you got to school when you were in middle school, rode your bike 5 miles each way uphill. Good for you. Did you change that when you were back for your senior year? Do you remember? Did you ride a moped, pub trans? How'd you get to school?
Yeah, I took the tram. I didn't have a bike there senior year, which is really a shame retrospectively. But yep, I was public transport all of senior year. In fact, my mom didn't own a car, so both of us were.
Do you remember a favorite meal at McDonald's or a favorite item to order? Was it
Poffertjes met powdersuiker. Poffertjes with powder sugar and stroop and butter.
They had those at McDonald's?
Oh, at McDonald's in particular?
Yeah.
I got food poisoning in 5th grade at McDonald's, and I never went back since. So I'm afraid I'm not much of an expert.
Here's a question. Poffertjes or
a school project because of it. I was super sick.
All right. Poffertjes or Pancake House?
Oh man, they're both heavenly. I have a whole thing of Panacoken plates, big Delft blue ones up in my kitchen. Yeah. Fond memories.
I found a Dutch pancake house. They called it a pancake house in London. When I did my master's in creative writing, and I did a study abroad down there, and I passed it, and I brought all the guys that were in the class with me. I was like, gotta go here. You ever been to Holland? They never been out of the States before. So we go there, and it was a pancake house, but they actually had poffertjes too, because there was just basically anything from the Netherlands. And they loved it. It was great. I remember it was awesome.
Besides poffertjes or your French fries with both mayonnaise and peanut butter sauce, any other snacks or food items that you remember having in Holland that you haven't had elsewhere?
Oh, yeah. Every Asher will tell you the same thing. Croquettes.
Oh. In retrospect, I don't know how hygienic they were to buy them at the train station, but I loved them.
I did it every time. So
me too. And the other ones, the little withered hot dog thingies, whatever the hell those were called.
Those are fricandel.
Fricandels.
Yeah, fricandel. Yeah, you bet.
Great name.
I also came across, I saw it the other day. I was like, oh, something, a kind of soda that I only remember ever having in Holland, but I realized is available elsewhere. And that was RC Cola in these little blue cans.
I found some strip waffles in the States. In Atlanta. I found a bunch of them. They sell them in grocery stores now in the States.
You can get them anywhere now here. And they're halfway decent too.
You do any extracurricular activities in school that you recall? Sports, acting, musicals?
Senior year, I did karate. I had a brief stint on a rugby team. But
I did too.
Yeah. I wasn't much of a jock in high school.
I think I made it day one on the rugby team.
I played in one game. The team only had one game and fell apart. It was quite a game.
Yeah, so maybe Ash was not quite as standout when it comes to sporting activities as it was with everything else. Maybe because our class was so small, but there were still plenty of people who did quite some sporting activities, interestingly enough. Didn't we do bowling as one of our activities?
What?
I thought there was bowling.
You were on the bowling team? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Could have been just for fun.
All right, here's another privilege of Ash story. Our swimming used to take place at the indoor-outdoor swimming pool next to the kurhaus. and it had a wave pool. Do you remember this?
Oh,
Clint?
yeah.
We used to go swimming. Didn't they take us swimming for physical education once a week or twice a week? Yeah.
We're all going to a wave pool.
Yeah.
Outdoor wave pool. That's fantastic.
Doesn't everyone do that?
Exactly.
All right, Bill. So this was fun. We've added to our list of possible questions for Ashers, but also more importantly, we've got to hear about your experience in your life. Thanks for sharing with us your interesting trajectory. There were a few more areas that we didn't get into as much as we could have, but mostly your post-Ash life, but I suppose that's okay. We'll leave it at that and say thanks very much for agreeing to be a guest and talk to us, and hopefully all the fellow Ashers who will listen to this. And thanks everybody for listening. And maybe hopefully you also got a good idea about decision making, although I'm not sure we've cleared up too much yet.
I think we need to call the Ash, passively wrong Ash versions, Ash privilege. Because all the things we just talked about, I'm like, man, they really treated us nice at that school. I forgot about all that stuff. The wave pool, I forgot about that.
Yeah, I'm going to go change my will when we get off the call.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks a lot, Bill. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.